Hey, so today's issue of Writing Notes is going to be about active and passive voice. So most of you have probably heard of these two different writing types before, or writing styles before, but you may not know a tremendous amount about them. Basically, active voice is where the language sort of comes alive and it moves very quickly, it moves very sort of excitingly. Passive voice is where things happen. So things are done rather than someone does things. So this sort of hinges on sort of basic sentence construction. And it hinges really on verbs. So the basic sort of formula, you probably all remember this from elementary school, the basic sort of formula for an English language sentence is subject, verb, object. So something or someone does something to something or someone. The dog chases the ball. Very sort of elementary school kind of example. The dog is the subject, so it's doing something. It chases. Chases is the verb. The ball is the thing that something is done to by the dog. So subject, verb, object. Now, this is true even in much more complex English language sentences. Basically, so this is not a sort of hard and fast, iron-bound rule that holds true in all situations. In general, passive voice involves to-be verbs. So the sort of basic to-be verbs are is, are, was, were, be, being, and been. So if you've got one of those verbs in your sentence, there's a decent chance that it is a passive sentence. Active voice gets rid of to-be verbs and substitutes other, stronger, more active verbs in their place. One sort of caveat to this is sometimes you have conditional sentences. The table is wood, the wall is white. You could make those sentences active by getting the to-be verb out, the to-be verb there being is. You could get is out of those sentences, but you have to sort of go a long way round and it's not really worth it. But there are some sentences where the passive construction really sounds quite awkward, and where it's actually easier and quicker to write in passive, or in active voice, excuse me. So for me, one of my own sort of pet peeves with active and passive voice is a phrase like, it was discovered. And I'm going to sort of caveat this whole discussion at the end by talking about sort of disciplinary differences. Traditional science people like phrases like it was discovered. I don't. I think it's a stupid way of expressing something because it erases the person who discovered it and it presumes sort of objectivity that's not really there. So rather than you saying it was discovered, for my money, I just put I discovered, we discovered, he discovered, she discovered, whoever it was, if it's sort of third person. So in this case, but this phrase actually gives us a really good sort of insight into active and passive voice. So with it was discovered, was is the active verb. Discovered is a passive verb. Now this is kind of interesting because the discovered is the same word in each formulation. So it was discovered, I discovered. Same exact word, but it's now in a different, it's made active in the second sentence. Discovered is the verb that's happening. In the first sentence, it was discovered, was is the verb that's acting. Discovered is a sort of passive supplementary verb. So, I want to give you guys a sort of real-world example of this, because in most cases, you can rewrite a sentence to take out to-be verbs either directly substituting more interesting active verbs, or you may have to sort of rewrite the whole sentence, reorganize the information in the sentence to get that to be verb out of there. This, I think, is a good thing to do because using more active voice engages with readers better, and it encourages readers to sort of go along with you. So what I've done, I've taken a sentence from Isaac Asimov's Thinking About Thinking, which is a really fascinating essay about IQ testing, and I've rewritten it to get the to-be verbs out. So the original sentence is this: if, as I maintain and firmly believe, there is no objective definition of intelligence, and what we call intelligence is only a creation of cultural fashion and subjective prejudice, what the devil is it we test when we make use of an intelligence test? Now, this is a pretty good sentence. Asimov's a good writer. Basically, what I've done with my revision of this sentence is to tighten the language slightly, and to get some more interesting verbs in there rather than the to-be verbs. So you may have noticed there are three instances of the word is in Asimov's original sentence. So here's what I've rewritten it as. If, as I maintain and firmly believe, no objective definition of intelligence exists, and cultural fashion and subjective prejudice dictate what we call intelligence, what the devil do we test when we make use of an intelligence test? Now, I've got a couple of different kinds of rewrites here, and it's actually several words shorter than Asimov's original, which is another sort of interesting byproduct of changing from passive to active voice. But what I've got here is a couple of different techniques for taking out to-be verbs. So I'm going to break this down into a couple of different phrases. So in Asimov's original, what the devil is it we test when we make use of an intelligence test, I've simply switched out the phrase is it for do. So what the devil do we test when we make use of an intelligence test? Very, very simple change, very straightforward. Boom. Active voice. Not that do is a tremendously more interesting verb than is it, but I've also had to make some more substantive syntactic changes in the structure of this sentence. So originally Asimov had, and what we call intelligence is only a creation of cultural fashion and subjective prejudice. Well, there's not really a good way to sort of just substitute out another verb in there. So what I've done instead is rewrite that clause. So what I've got instead is, and cultural fashion and subjective prejudice dictate what we call intelligence. So dictate is a more interesting, more engaging verb than is. And so this is sort of the idea of active versus passive voice, is which verbs are active, which verbs are secondary, how many to-be verbs do you have, and what's their function within the sentence, and so on and so on. Now, the last thing I want to say about this is, I sort of previewed this earlier, you want to make sure that you become aware of your discipline's style, because something like English, something like creative writing, and sort of popular writing, mainstream writing for a sort of general audience in, say, magazines, newspapers, things like this, are going to favor active voice because it engages readers. Active voice draws the reader in, pulls us in, and we go along for the ride. On the other hand, the sciences, mathematics, so both the hard sciences and the social sciences, so chemistry, biology, engineering, as well as things like psychology, political science, sometimes sociology, History is a sort of mixed bag. It really depends more on the style of the person reading it, the style of your instructor if you're a student, or whatever. But you want to be familiar with the stylistic conventions of your discipline. Because again, if you're in the hard sciences or the social sciences, most of the time, instructors, journal article reviewers, book publishers, things like that, are going to want passive voice. And I'm not going to get into sort of why that is. There's disciplinary reasons for that. And there's disciplinary reasons why in the humanities and the arts we tend to prefer active voice. But what you want to do, and a good way to figure this out, two good ways to figure this out actually. One, ask your instructors if you're a student. Two, read widely in that discipline and see what people generally do. So if you read, say, 12 journal articles in chemistry and they're all using passive voice, there's a good chance that passive voice is what you should be using. Thanks.